Your thoughts shape your life, so learn to control them. In the realm of psychology, there's a fascinating idea that our thoughts aren't just mirrors reflecting reality, but active sculptors shaping our perception of the world. This concept, championed by the esteemed psychologist and Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman, revolves around two distinct systems of thought that govern our minds. Let's call the first one the fast thinker. This system is quick, instinctive, and emotional. It's the part of your brain that instantly knows the answer to 2 plus 2, or recognizes a familiar face in a crowd. It's guided by past experiences and emotions, helping us make snap judgments and decisions. But, like a hasty friend, it can sometimes lead us astray. It's prone to biases and can be overly swayed by our feelings. Now, meet the slow thinker. This system is deliberate, logical, and takes its sweet time. It's the part of your brain that grapples with complex math problems or mulls over big life decisions like buying a house. It's more analytical and rational, but it's also more laborious and slower. The trick to mastering our thoughts, according to Kahneman, is to understand how these two systems interact. By recognizing the potential pitfalls of fast thinking, we can harness our slow thinking more effectively to make sound decisions. For instance, if we know we're prone to impulsive decisions when we're emotional, we can learn to hit the pause button and let our slow thinking take the wheel for a more objective analysis. Kahneman peppers his theory with real-life examples and research studies. One such example is how we tend to overestimate the likelihood of rare events because they're more memorable. This is known as the availability heuristic, a fancy term for a mental shortcut based on immediate examples that come to mind. By understanding this bias, we can learn to question our initial judgments and let our slow thinking evaluate the actual odds. In a nutshell, understanding and controlling our thoughts is crucial. By being aware of the two systems of thought and their potential biases and errors, we can make better decisions and shape a more accurate perception of the world. So, the next time you're faced with a decision, remember the fast thinker and the slow thinker and choose wisely. Your brain has two systems that control when and how you think. Imagine your brain as a two-pilot cockpit. One pilot, let's call him Pilot 1, is quick, instinctive, and automatic. He's the one who takes over when you're startled by a sudden noise or when you instantly recognize a friend's face in a crowd. He's the one who makes snap judgments and quick decisions without you even realizing it. Pilot 2, on the other hand, is the more deliberate and logical one. He's the one who takes over when you're trying to solve a complex math problem or when you're deciding which car to buy. He's the one who takes his time, weighs the options, and makes careful, reasoned decisions. These two pilots work together to help you navigate through life. Pilot 1 gives you the initial impressions and gut feelings, and Pilot 2 processes these impressions and makes the final decisions. But if Pilot 2 is busy or distracted, he might just go along with Pilot 1's suggestions without much thought. This can sometimes lead to mistakes or biases in your thinking. Take this classic brain teaser for example. A bat and a ball together cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Your Pilot 1 might quickly suggest that the ball costs 10 cents. But if you do the math, you'll realize that this would make the bat cost $1.10 since it's $1 more than the ball, making the total $1.20, not $1.10. If you engage your Pilot 2 to double-check the math, you'll find that the ball actually costs 5 cents and the bat costs $1.05. In a nutshell, Pilot 1 is fast, intuitive, and emotional, while Pilot 2 is slow, thoughtful, and logical. By understanding how these two pilots work, we can become more aware of our own thought processes, make better decisions, and avoid falling into cognitive traps. We often judge based on gut feelings, not facts or stats. In the realm of decision-making, we humans often lean more towards our gut feelings and biases rather than relying on cold, hard facts. This is largely due to the two systems of thought that steer our minds. The first, System 1, is quick, instinctive, and driven by emotion. The second, System 2, is slower, more thoughtful, and logical. To demonstrate this, let's consider an experiment conducted by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, two renowned psychologists. They set up a Wheel of Fortune game, but with a twist. The wheel was rigged to stop only at 10 or 65. They then asked a group of students to spin the wheel and answer two questions about the number of African nations in the United Nations. The first question was whether the percentage was higher or lower than the number on the wheel. The second was what they thought the actual percentage was. The intriguing part? Those who spun a 10 guessed lower percentages, while those who spun a 65 guessed higher percentages. This showed that the students' judgments were swayed by the random number they saw on the wheel, a completely irrelevant piece of information, rather than relying on factual knowledge or statistical reasoning. Another way we often let our intuition override facts is through something called the availability heuristic. This is a mental shortcut we use that relies on the first examples that pop into our heads when thinking about a specific topic or making a decision. For example, if someone asked you about the frequency of plane crashes, you might immediately think of the most recent crash you heard about on the news. This could lead you to believe that plane crashes happen more often than they actually do, even though statistically, flying is much safer than driving. This happens because the dramatic, vivid example that's fresh in your memory influences your judgment more than the boring, statistical fact. Kahneman also talks about how emotionally charged events can skew our judgment. For instance, after hearing about a terrible plane crash with no survivors, you might feel a heightened sense of fear and danger associated with flying, even though the statistical likelihood of being in a plane crash is extremely low. This happens because our brains are wired to react more strongly to emotionally charged events, which can warp our perception of risk and probability. In a nutshell, Kahneman's work shines a light on how our judgments and decisions are often swayed more by bias, intuition, and emotion than by facts and statistics. By understanding this, we can become more aware of our cognitive biases and strive to make more informed and rational decisions. A bad understanding of the past can mess up the present and future. Let's dive into a fascinating concept about how our understanding of the past, especially if it's flawed or incomplete, can shape our present and future. This idea is deeply rooted in the way we humans process information and make decisions, often basing our conclusions on incomplete or incorrect data. First, let's talk about base rates. In simple terms, a base rate is the overall chance of something happening. For example, if you're in a city full of doctors, the chance of bumping into one is pretty high. But here's the catch. We humans often ignore these base rates when we come across more specific, but possibly misleading, information. This brings us to the idea of evidence. In this context, evidence is the specific information or details we have about a situation or person. Let's say you meet someone at a party wearing a stethoscope as part of their costume. You might immediately think they're a doctor, even though the overall chance of that being true is quite low. Why? Because our brains are wired to focus on specific, immediate evidence rather than broader statistical probabilities. But this reliance on evidence can lead us astray. Imagine you meet a tall, thin person who's an athlete. Based on these details, you might quickly guess they're a basketball player. But you could be wrong. They could be a runner, a swimmer, or play any number of sports. By focusing only on the evidence and ignoring the base rate, the overall distribution of heights and body types across different sports, we can easily jump to the wrong conclusion. There's another interesting point to consider. Adding more details to a description can make it seem more believable, even if these details don't necessarily make it more accurate. Our brains love stories and narratives, and a detailed description can often feel like a compelling story. But remember, good information isn't just detailed. It's also precise and accurate. So, what's the takeaway? Our tendency to focus on specific evidence and detailed narratives, while often ignoring base rates and the bigger picture, can lead us to form inaccurate perceptions and make poor decisions. This is how flawed or incomplete understanding of the past can shape our present and future, by leading us to conclusions and decisions based on incomplete or misleading information.